The Souls games are known for having really fun and addicting combat, whether it's the slower methodical nature of the early Dark Souls games, where there's weight behind every attack and movement, the aggressive style of Bloodborne that encourages the player to get back into the action even after taking damage, the rhythmic combat style of Sekiro, or the amalgamation of all those aspects blended together in Elden Ring. All of the combat in these games are great one way or the other, but today I'm going to briefly go over all of them to see which of the game's combat system is the best. At least for me. You see, this topic is extremely subjective as there's no right or wrong answers, so please bear in mind that this is just me ranking them based on personal preferences, and obviously everyone's ranking would be different. Anyways, if you like Soulsborne content like this, then be sure to like and subscribe, only if you want to. Now without wasting any more of your time, let's get right into the ranking. Now let's start with Demon Souls. Demon Souls was the first entry into the Souls series, and for that alone, it deserves a ton of respect. It laid the groundwork for the combat style that would become the foundation of future games. Now when we talk about the combat itself, it's not bad by any means, but compared to the rest of the series, I have to say, it feels the weakest, at least in my opinion. The pacing of combat in Demon Souls is much slower, which isn't necessarily a negative, depending on your preferences. Some players really love that more deliberate, methodical style. It's almost like you're playing a game of chess, having to think several moves ahead, waiting for that perfect moment to strike. Personally though, I lean toward faster paced combat system. In Demon Souls, you don't get much of that. It's all about positioning, patience, and stamina management, which is great on its own, but it doesn't quite scratch the same itch as later games do for me. When it comes down to weapon variety, Demon Souls offers a decent amount. I think there's around 70 to 80 weapons, which sounds impressive, but here's the thing. While you do get options, most of them feel pretty basic. There's not a ton of mechanical variety in how they handle. Sure, you've got your great swords that are slow but pack a punch, and your straight swords that are faster but deal less damage. Then you've got the weapons with special effects like bleed, magic, or fire. But aside from those differences, they're mostly just your standard arsenal. The real standout moves and special abilities for weapons, which became more of a thing in the later Souls games, are pretty lacking here. That being said, I'm willing to cut Demon Souls some slack. It was the first Souls game, so a lot of what it did was experimental. They were laying the groundwork for what to come next, and for that I have to give it a pass. Even though the combat doesn't quite hold up against the newer titles, it's still a respectable first attempt that paved the way for some of the best combat systems we've seen in gaming. Now let's talk about Dark Souls 1. The combat here is decent overall, and one thing that genuinely surprised me was how responsive and somewhat quicker it felt compared to Demon Souls. It's even faster in some aspects than Dark Souls 2, which is kind of interesting because you'd think the sequel would improve upon that, but Dark Souls 1 manages to feel smoother in comparison. It's still got the methodical pace that the series is known for, but it's a bit snappier when you're in the middle of the action, which I appreciate. That said, there are a few things about the combat that I'm not a huge fan of. One of the biggest issues I have with Dark Souls 1 is the lack of omnidirectional rolling while locked on. For some reason, just like Demon Souls on the PS3, you're limited to rolling only in 4 directions, north, south, east, and west. I mean, why? It feels really restrictive, and I'm not entirely sure why they stuck with this design choice. It's especially frustrating in tight spaces or boss fights where you need more fluid movement to dodge properly. The later games fixed this, but in Dark Souls 1 it can feel a bit clunky at times. Aside from that though, the combat is pretty similar to Demon Souls, just slightly quicker. Another improvement that Dark Souls 1 made is the fact that a lot of the combat takes place in more open spaces. Demon Souls often had you fighting in narrow corridors or tight areas, which could be cool for building tension, but it also limited your movement options. Dark Souls 1 opened things up a bit more, giving you more room to maneuver in battles, and that helps the combat to feel a little less constrained. Now don't get me wrong, there are definitely some areas that, are very tight, Capra Demon boss room, but most areas felt a bit more open. You get to be more tactical in your approach, using the environment to your advantage, which is something I enjoy. When it comes down to weapon variety, Dark Souls 1 really stepped things up, offering over 100 weapons to choose from. That sounds great on paper, and some of these weapons are genuinely unique and fun to use. For example, the Golem Axe can shoot wind projectiles, which is pretty awesome and adds some much needed flair to the combat. But to be honest, while the game has a lot of weapons, many of them still feel kind of samey. Aside from a few standout options, a lot of weapons don't offer enough uniqueness in terms of special moves or mechanics to really set them apart. At the end of the day though, the combat in Dark Souls 1 is decent and still holds up today, as long as you avoid locking on to an enemy. But compared to the other games in the series, it's kind of mid. It's not bad by any means, but it doesn't quite hit the highs of the more refined combat systems that would come later on. Dark Souls 2. The overall combat in Dark Souls 2 might be slower than 1, but having omnidirectional rolling is a life changer. However, despite the game adding way more weapons and having the ability to power stance, the slower pace is not really my style. Speaking of power stancing, this allows you to wield two weapons of the same category together, but I do think it's a bit different in Dark Souls 2 compared to Elden Ring. When both weapons are fully upgraded, this allows you to perform a unique moveset using both weapons at the same time. It also gives you extra damage as well. Now, while this is a good thing, there was something about Dark Souls 2 that I didn't like that's somewhat tied to combat. What I'm talking about is adaptability. And look, I'm not gonna go on a rant about this because trust me, I know a lot of people already did, but if you don't know what adaptability is, it's basically a stat you can level up in Dark Souls 2, which gives you more iframes when it comes on to dodging it. And it's also tied to the healing speed as well. Now, you might think this isn't a bad thing since you basically get the option to heal faster or to dodge better than before, but here's the thing. The iframes that you get for dodging in Dark Souls 2 is way less compared to that of Dark Souls 1 and Demon Souls, which means that sometimes even if you thought you dodged an enemy attack perfectly, you would still take a large amount of chip damage. So what this means is that in order to get the regular iframes from a dodge in Dark Souls 1 and Dark Souls 2, you will have to level up adaptability all the way up to 25 to 30, which is just a very weird and dumb decision. I usually find it weird when games make you have to level up or unlock a feature or mechanics that should have been in the core gameplay from the beginning. Next, let's talk about the healing. Man, it's slow. I swear I had my ADP at 25 and healing got me killed more times than I would like to admit. Look, I'm all for making the combat slow, but at least make healing a bit quicker. And this wouldn't be a bad thing if most of the bosses didn't have input reading, which means every time you try to heal, they would immediately attack you. But despite the combat feeling super slow and floaty and the fact that you have to level up adaptability, the combat does feel slightly better than the previous games due to the omnidirectional rolling while locked on and the ability to power stance weapons. Now, Dark Souls 3 takes the already established Souls combat formula and smoothed it out even more. Combat is much faster, smoother, and not floaty like Dark Souls 2. They also scrapped the adaptability mechanic, which I'm very thankful for because I'm pretty sure no one missed that. Now, apart from the combat being faster, your weapons have a bit more uniqueness to them in the form of weapon arts. What this means is that if you press L2 or LT, your weapon will perform a special attack or grant you a special buff. Now, I'm sure the previous games had some unique weapons like this, again the Golem Axe from Dark Souls 1, but in this game a lot of the weapons are like that. Now, the only thing I wish they brought back was power stancing, but hey, the combat feels smooth, the healing is fast, and the weapons are unique. I also love how the bosses are well designed around the combat mechanically. They never feel too fast or too slow to the player, which is something that I really like. So that's enough for me to rank it higher than the rest. Bloodborne. I know some of y'all are in shock right now due to it being at only 3rd place, and to be fair, I wanted to put Bloodborne higher as I do love a lot of things about the combat, but it has some things or something I didn't really like. But before I get into what I find negative about the combat, let's talk about the positives. First of all, I really like the pacing. Bloodborne's combat flow relies on the player being more aggressive compared to the previous games, and as a person who loves fast-paced games, this right here is my shit. How the game rewards aggression is by making the hunter fast enough to easily keep up with the bosses. Dodging and evading in this game is done by quick step instead of rolling, which is good because it makes getting back into the action after evading an attack much faster. But the main way the game rewards an aggressive playstyle is with the rally mechanic. So in Bloodborne, every time you get hit, for a short period of time you can regain a portion of the health you've lost by landing hits on the enemy. This is really great for adrenaline junkies who just wants to turn off their brain and just go ham on a boss. The second best thing about the combat is the parrying. Parrying in Bloodborne doesn't involve a shield like the rest of the games, but instead a gun. This makes parrying a bit more fun and cooler, even though it can make some bosses pushovers as the parry windows can be very forgiving, but it doesn't take away from how engaging it makes the combat feel. Now the last thing that makes the combat feels great is the trick weapons. You see, unlike the other titles, Bloodborne doesn't have the typical weapon categories like straight swords, great swords, spears, etc. Instead, you just have weapons that can basically transform into other weapons, like Ludwig's Holy Blade, which can transform from a longsword to a great sword when combined with its sheath. This is really fun and it makes up for the less amount of weapons you have in the game, as each of them are basically two combined. With this, you also have unique transforming combos with each of the weapons. Now, despite how much I love the trick weapon system, there is something that holds it back for me, and it's a very small issue, thankfully. But the main issue I have with it is just how little some of the weapons interested me. This might be because the game only has around 25, which makes the selection of my favorites being significantly lower than the other games. However, again, this is just a slight issue, and if the game had way more weapons, I would have put it at number 2 or maybe number 1, but I have to put it here for now. Again, don't take this as me saying the game having a small amount of weapons is a bad thing, as I truly understand why it only has a few. Now here we have Elden Ring. If we're being honest, I think Elden Ring's combat could have easily been number 1 because of variety alone. You see, Elden Ring takes aspects from previous Souls titles and combine all of them together as options for the player. First of all, weapon arts make a comeback, but now they're called Ashes of War and they can be placed onto different weapons, giving the game more freedom in terms of weapon customization. You have Great Runes, which gives you certain effects, like one similar to the rally system from Bloodborne, where you can regain a portion of your health immediately after taking damage by attacking the enemy. You have Tears, which grants you additional boosts in combat, and one of the best ones in my opinion is Deflecting Heart Tear, which can make the game feel almost like Sekiro. And you can also use summons like Mimic Tear, and one final thing, the magic in the game is definitely way better than the previous ones with the amount of options you have. And apart from those, you also have a lot of weapons to choose from, whether they are unique or just regular weapons. Now while all of this is good, the main issue I really have with the combat of Elden Ring is that I wish the character was a bit faster. No, I'm not saying that the Tarnished is slow, but the bosses in this game, especially the DLC ones, don't have that much uptime, which means after they do a long combo, they usually don't give the player enough time to attack them, because when they do their long combos, this will oftentimes create a large space between them and your character, and after they are finished and you try to attack them, they will immediately start another attack chain as soon as you land a hit, which makes me believe that in the next Souls title, the bosses can be as fast as they want, but at least make it easier for the players to keep up with them by making us a bit faster. But apart from that, Elden Ring's combat is literally the peak of traditional Souls combat. Now when we're talking about addictive video game combat, you can't leave out Sekiro. The fluidity of the battles, especially the boss fights, is almost perfect. This is mainly because of the deflection mechanic. The entire game revolves around deflection, which means if you try to play it like any other Souls game, you're gonna have some trouble. While other games have some sort of parry mechanic, Sekiro's version feels the most rhythmic, and I feel like that's what adds to its fun. For example, Lies of P had a parry mechanic that was similar to Sekiro, but it felt a bit awkward and heavy in comparison. I get that Lies of P, you get fewer parry frames than in Sekiro, but I think it's the lack of fluidity in the attacks that makes parrying in the game less enjoyable. And just to clarify, I'm not shitting on Lies of P at all. It's an amazing game and I've beaten it like 2 to 3 times. I just wanted to throw in as a comparison. Also, I can't wait for the DLC. First Berserker Kazan is the only game that felt super close to Sekiro, but it still doesn't have that rhythmic feeling. Still a really good game though. Now while deflection plays a huge role in Sekiro, you also have to keep an eye out for Perleus attacks, which are highlighted with the red kanji. If the enemy is about to do a thrust attack, you need to use Mikiri counter by pressing the dodge button right when the attack is about to land. If they're doing a sweep attack, it's best to jump on them to deal posture damage, and if they're about to hit you with lightning, jump into the air as soon as the attack is about to land and immediately press the attack button to reverse it. Stuff like that makes the combat even more engaging. The game also gives you various skills and prosthetic tools, which often plays an optional but fun part in any encounter. Now the only downside to the combat of Sekiro is that you can only use one weapon, which is the katana. Now I know it would have been hard to implement other weapons, but if FromSoft makes a spiritual successor to the game, I do wish they implement more weapons. And look, I know it can work, it would just take a while. While Elden Ring may have more weapons and incorporate elements from previous Souls games, in my opinion, Sekiro's combat is a bit more fun because of its rhythmic and addictive nature. Now remember, this was just my opinion. Everyone's list would look different. I'm sure there are a lot of people who prefers Elden Ring's combat over Sekiro, or some would think that Bloodborne's combat is the best. It's subjective, so please don't take this seriously. Now this was the end of the video, and if you enjoyed it, then please leave a like, only if you want to. And shout out to my Patreon members on the screen, Jabroni Jones, Daniel Scotland, and a new member, Mac. Thank you for showing support, and I also thank the rest of you guys for watching this video. I hope y'all have a good one.